never done this before. Hi everyone, my name is Jacob. I'm the host here on Something Sinister. And really quickly, before we get into the main subject of the video, I just really wanted to make an announcement and really say thank you to everyone who has supports the channel now and continues to support the channel despite, my faulty weird upload schedule and stuff like that. At the time of making this video, I think we're sitting at 7.5 thousand subscribers, which is really immaculate and something that I am just really happy about, and I just thank you guys so much for that. Another thing, this is the first video that I'm going to do like chapter breaks. So like if you scroll down to the little bar where you would like fast forward or scrub through the video, I can break it into chapters. So if you want to skip this introduction, you're now easily able to do so. Or if you see a certain tier that you want to skip to, you can easily find that as well. So this particular video is the UFO encounters and alien abductions iceberg. This iceberg was not in fact created by myself, but was actually created by a Reddit user who I will link to down below. So when it comes to UFOlogy and understanding sort of the topic as a whole, there's a couple vocab words that I want to go over with you guys so that when you're watching this video, you're going to hear them and you're going to say, hey, I know what that means. So the first term is missing time, and this refers to in alien abduction cases specifically. Say you have an individual who is out and about, in their yard, and they see a UFO or some type of extraterrestrial being, and then they're like, oh, that's weird, and they go back in the house and they look at their watch and they realize that 3 hours has passed by. That is what we refer to as missing time, or the time specifically when an individual went unconscious or blacked out and was either aboard the craft or making direct contact. Another term that is sort of intertwined with missing time is hypnosis. Hypnosis is a tool used by therapists or psychiatrists. Anyone who is counseling an abductee may use hypnosis as a means of recalling that missing time. Hypnosis is kind of like being hypnotized, or the conductor puts you in a really relaxed state, and by doing so, you are sort of able to uncover traumatic past events or memories that you might have blocked out, because a lot of the times when individuals are abducted, they are under such intense stress and fear that they mentally block it out completely. So a lot of the time when they undergo hypnosis, it's in an effort to recall these horrific events. So I think that's about everything that you need to know going into the video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoy it. If you have any suggestions for videos in general, or if you want to link me to an iceberg that you find particularly chilling, sinister, go ahead and leave it down in the comments below and I'll check it out. So yep, that's it. Enjoy.
In 1947, an aircraft of some sort crashed in the desert of Corona, New Mexico. The remnants of the craft was picked up by members of the Roswell Army Airfield, who claimed it was nothing more than a fallen blimp. After some time, theories regarding the craft began to surface. Some speculated that the debris found were actually of a UFO and not a typical blimp. After some time, a retired lieutenant came out and said that the debris were actually of a UFO and that the military had used the blimp story as a means of covering everything up. The lieutenant also went into more detail, stating that there were also occupants picked up from the crash. These occupants, extraterrestrials, were written off as being test dummies by the US government. Betty Andreessen claims that she was abducted by aliens in 1967. Her story began on the evening of January 25th in her home located in Massachusetts. The lights went out in her home, and her 7 children and her parents, who were visiting, gathered in the kitchen. Her father looked out the back window and was attracted by a pink light that was shining, and he saw several little creatures which he thought of as Halloween-like entities. He made a passing note of them, but did not do anything. The next morning, all appeared to be back to normal, except Andreessen had a strange feeling that something was out of the ordinary. Over the next few weeks, she had flashbacks of humanoid creatures and otherworldly environments, but it was not until 1977 when she underwent hypnosis and the entire story was surfaced. It appears that soon after her father saw the creatures, all of the family was placed in a state of paralysis, and several small, gray beings entered the house and addressed her telepathically. They took her aboard the spaceship, an action requiring Andreessen to pass through a closed door of her house and to float up towards a disc-shaped craft. On the board of the ship, she was run through a series of tests that included probes of her body with a needle and the removal of a small object from her head by a needle inserted into her nostril. She next had a visionary experience of traveling into another world where she met a being whom she, a Christian, said was God. The voice told her that she was the chosen one. The events aboard the ship were closed by a final lecture by the entity earlier identified as Quasga, who told her that she would forget what had occurred for a while, but that he and his companions loved humanity and had come to help. Humans needed to study nature to rid themselves of their self-destructive tendencies. They left her with a book, which she examined several days later, but again only remembered in 1977. Betty and Barney Hill were driving home late one night when they noticed a strange light in the sky. Curious, they exited their vehicle and peered up at the ship through a pair of binoculars. Inside, they could see strange beings watching them from inside the glass windows. Upon returning home, they reported feeling very strange. They both settled in and dismissed their discomfort as a result of their traveling. Later on, under hypnosis, the two recalled being taken aboard the ship and subjected to various medical experiments. While this is one of the most famous first abduction stories, there is a lot of evidence that stacks up in favor of the Hills' story. While aboard the ship, Betty was shown a star map, which she was able to draw later on. Marjorie Fish, who was an elementary school teacher and amateur astronomer, was intrigued by this star map. Fish had wondered if it might be deciphered to determine which star system the UFO came from. After studying Betty's drawing, she found that Betty had drawn an accurate representation of the star system of Zeta Reticuli. On the evening of October 11, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker told the Jackson County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office that they were fishing off of a pier on the west bank of Pascagoula River in Mississippi when they heard a whirring or a whizzing sound. It was then when they saw two flashing blue lights and observed an oval-shaped object about 30 to 40 feet across and 8 to 10 feet high. Parker and Hickson claimed that they were conscious but paralyzed, while three creatures with robotic slit mouths and crab-like pincers took them aboard the ship and subjected them to an examination. On the evening of August 21, 1955, 5 adults and 7 children arrived at the Hopkinsville police station claiming that small alien creatures from a spaceship were attacking their farmhouse and that they had been holding them off with gunfire for nearly 4 hours. 2 of the adults, Elmer Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor, claimed that they had been shooting at 12 to 15 short, dark figures who repeatedly popped up at the doorway or peered into the windows. Concerned about a possible gun battle between local citizens, 4 city police, 5 state troopers, 3 deputy sheriffs, and 4 military police from a nearby U.S. Army Fort Campbell drove to the Sutton farmhouse located near the town of Kelly in Christian County. Their search yielded nothing apart from the evidence of gunfire and holes in the window and door screens made by firearms. The next day, neighbors told 2 officers that the families had packed up and left after claiming that the creatures had returned at about 3:30 in the morning. Many skeptics point out the similarities between the small creatures described and the great horned owl. According to Walton and a number of other members from the logging crew, on November 5, 1975, they were all working with a timber stand improvement crew in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona, when something terrible had happened. While riding in the truck with 6 of his co-workers, they allegedly encountered a saucer-shaped object hovering over the ground at approximately 110 feet away, making a high-pitched buzzing noise. Walton claims that after he left the truck, he approached the object, and a beam of light had suddenly appeared from the craft and knocked him unconscious. The other 6 men were frightened and supposedly drove away. Walton claimed that he awoke in a hospital-like room and was being observed by 3 short, bald creatures. He claimed that he fought with them until a human wearing a helmet led Walton into another room. It was there where he blacked out as 3 other humans put a clear plastic mask over his face. Walton has claimed that he remembers nothing else until he found himself walking along the highway 5 days later with the flying saucer departing above him. In UFOlogy, Nordic aliens are humanoid extraterrestrials purported to come from the Pleiades, who resemble Nordic Scandinavians. Professed contactees describe them as being 6 to 7 feet tall, with long blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin. UFOologist George Adamski is credited with being among the first to claim contact with Nordic aliens in the mid-1950s. And scholars note that the mythology of extraterrestrial visitation from beings with features described as Aryan often include claims of telepathy, benevolence, and physical beauty. In contactee and UFOlogy literature, Nordic aliens are often described as benevolent or even magical beings who want to observe and communicate with humans and are concerned about the Earth's environment or prospects of world peace. Believers also ascribe telepathic powers to Nordic aliens and describe them as paternal, watchful, smiling, affectionate, and youthful. In August of 1976, 4 men, brothers Jack and Jim Weiner, and their friends Chuck Rack and Charlie Foltz, went on a camping trip for 2 weeks in the Allagash Wilderness in Maine. On the second night, Jim noticed a strange bright object in the sky that appeared for about 30 seconds and then vanished. 2 nights later, on August 20th, the men were fishing in a boat when the bright object appeared once again. Chuck was the first to notice the object. The men noticed that it was very bright, similar to the sun, even. Charlie tried to signal SOS to the object. Suddenly, the object shot out a bright light which began following the men along the water. The men began to paddle back to shore, but the next thing they remembered was being on shore and the bright light vanishing. The men thought it was strange that the fire that they had made minutes before they had been fishing had already completely burnt out, suggesting that they had been gone for several hours. The men felt very fatigued and went to bed. Later on, the 4 men decided to go under hypnosis. Each agreed to go separately and not tell the other what they had remembered. They each described, in frightening detail, about how they were abducted and then probed by aliens back in 1976. The aliens apparently took samples of the men's skin and body fluids. Jack remembered that the aliens had terrifying faces. They told him not to be afraid and to do what they say. Charlie described the ship as like a doctor's office. He claimed that they put a panel over his chest and scraped the skin off of his body. Finally, Chuck claimed that he had a good view of what the aliens were doing to Charlie. The device that the aliens used was silver and had curves. To him, it appeared that Charlie was in pain. After the sessions, Ray brought the 4 men back together. They learned that each of them had recalled the same events. They each took a polygraph examination and passed. In Falkville, Alabama, on October 17, 1973, a spaceship was spotted out in a field. The tinfoil alien was clad in a suit fabricated from a similar or thick type of aluminum foil, intensely bright and as smooth as glass. Its movements were childlike or even monkey-like, but at the same time very robotic and mechanical. There appeared to be no separation between the neck and head, which bore an antenna. It ran at speeds that, according to witnesses, far exceeded that of any human they'd ever seen. It seemed to have a literal spring in its step, covering 3 meters every way. The Domston blobs are modern Swedish UFO legends related to the 1958 alien counter story in which 2 men claimed to be attacked by a group of strange, gray, blob-like creatures that tried to pull them into their small spacecraft. According to the men, the creatures lacked notable features and were no larger than 4 feet tall, but possessed a near unbreakable grip, frightening speed, and could dodge their attempts to fight back, almost as if they could read the men's thoughts. Ultimately, the creatures would flee back into their spacecraft when the sound of a nearby car horn frightened them away. No further reports of the creatures would ever surface. At 7:15 p.m. on September 12, 1952, two brothers and their friends said that they had saw a bright object cross the sky and land on the property of a local farmer named G. Bailey Fisher. The boys went to the home of Kathleen May, where they told their story. May, accompanied by the three boys, local children Neil Nunley and Ronnie Shaver, and West Virginia National Guardsman Eugene Lemon, went to the Fisher farm in an effort to locate whatever the boys had said they had seen. The group reached the top of the hill, where Nunley said that she saw a pulsing red light. Lemon said he had aimed the flashlight in that direction and momentarily saw a man-like figure with a round, red face surrounded by a pointed hood-like shape. May described the figure as having small, claw-like hands, clothing-like folds, and a head that resembled the ace of spades. According to the story, when the figure made a hissing sound and glided toward the group, Lemon screamed and dropped his flashlight, causing the group to run away. The group said that they had smelled a pungent mist, and sometime later they were nauseated. The local sheriff and a deputy had began investigating the reports of the crashed aircraft in the area. They searched the site of the reported monster, but saw, heard, and smelled nothing. On May 20th, 1967, 51-year-old Stephen Michalak was prospecting in Falcon Lake, Manitoba, when two UFOs appeared in the sky. He described them as two cigarette-shaped objects with humps in the middle. One of the objects then landed near him. He looked to see if there were any identifying marks on it, but he did not see any. He assumed that it was an experimental vehicle from the United States. A few seconds later, a door on the craft had opened and he heard voices from inside. He tried to speak to the operators of the craft in English, Russian, Polish, and German, but received no response to all of them. As he walked closer to the door, the light emitting from inside had become so bright that he had to snap down the visor on his safety goggles. Then the door suddenly shut. He tried to touch the craft, but was burned by its exterior. The craft rotated clockwise, and he noticed a grid-like exhaust fan on the side of it, which shot out a large amount of gas that set his clothes on fire. Mysterious burns also appeared on his body. The UFO then went up to the sky and flew away. It was 1:15 on the morning of June 25th, 1974, when a couple were settling into bed. The husband, who was unable to sleep, heard an odd noise coming from the outside of their mobile home. When he went to investigate, he was horrified to find a hovering object in the yard. The husband then went and woke up his wife. When they reapproached the window, they found strange-looking creatures ascending from the craft into a nearby creek. The creatures were not walking, so to speak, but instead would float above the ground. The creatures would then disappear along with the craft, and no evidence would ever be recovered regarding the event. At 11 a.m. on April 18, 1961, Joe Simonton was sitting in his rural Eagle River home enjoying a late breakfast when he heard a commotion outside. When he investigated, he witnessed a flying saucer brighter than chrome hovering above his house. The craft eventually landed in the backyard. The saucer then opened up. Sitting inside were three mute aliens, which Joe described as Italian-looking. Joe was then given a large container and somehow discerned that these creatures wanted water. When he returned with the liquid, one of the aliens was cooking pancakes on a flameless cooking appliance. The creatures gave Joe the pancakes, saluted him, and flew away towards the south. On September 16, 1994, there was a UFO sighting outside of Ruwa, Zimbabwe. 62 students at the aerial school, aged between 6 and 12, claimed that they saw one or more silver craft descend from the sky and land in a nearby field. The basic details of the sightings were quite consistent, although not all the details were. One or more silver objects, usually described as discs, appeared in the sky. They then floated down to a field of brush and small trees just outside of the school property. Between 1 and 4 creatures with big eyes and dressed all in black exited the craft and approached the children. At this point, many of the children ran, but some, mostly the older pupils, stayed and watched the approach. According to interviews, the creatures, or extraterrestrials, then telepathically communicated to the children an environmental-based message before returning to the craft and flying away. The Canula humanoid sighting is an extraterrestrial sighting that took place on the evening of February 2, 1971. At approximately 8 p.m., 2 Finnish women were driving when they spied a strange light behind their car on the right side of the road. After a few moments, this mysterious light slipped over the vehicle and began to pace the car on the left side of the road. The entity was described as a peculiar helmeted creature that stood approximately 3 feet tall. The enigmatic entity was clad in a greenish-brown suit and crossed the road in front of the 2 women, utilizing a series of small jumps. On the front of the head was a faceplate that was described as being akin to that of a scuba diver. Although the creature had arms and legs, the suit gave no indication of hands or fingers. It was many years ago when a class of pupils at Broadhaven Primary School said that they had spotted a UFO in the field near their playground. It was one of a wave of sightings in the area in 1977. David Davies, who was 10 at the time, said that he had heard reports from older pupils claiming that they saw flying saucers throughout the day. They were described as being cigar-shaped and with a dome covering the middle third. My sightings had only lasted a couple of seconds, said Davies. It popped up and then it went back behind a tree. Mr. Davies said that he did not feel afraid but was more in awe and wonderment, although he did admit that he felt a strange desire to run away. None of the teachers believed the children at the time, so the headmaster separated them and got them to draw what they had seen. There were slight variations, but they had all drawn basically the same craft. Mr. Davies described the days that followed as a wild roller coaster. It went crazy with the media, and it was difficult to settle down and actually think about what we had seen. 2 months later, Rosa Granville, who had run the Haven Fort Hotel in a nearby town titled Little Haven, described seeing an object which looked as though it was an upside-down saucer, and accompanying the craft were 2 faceless humanoid creatures with pointed heads. The craft had been so hot that Granville said that she had felt as though her face had been burned. When Granville had visited the field, she had said that at least 2 inches of the ground had been burned. She said that the incident had made her feel agitated and disturbed. The Grinning Man is reported to be human-like in appearance, though is commonly associated with UFO activity and is sometimes believed to be an alien itself. It is also believed possible that he is connected to the Men in Black. In his first sighting, he was described as being over 6 feet tall and wearing a reflective green suit with a black belt. He had a dark complexion and small, beady eyes set far apart. He was described as not having any nose, ears, or hair. In his second known encounter, his suit was described to be blue instead of green, but still retained its reflective property. Along with that, he was described as looking perfectly natural with slicked back hair, a coat with the top 2 buttons unbuttoned, and having pants lighter than the coat but still with the same material. He was also described as being quite tan, though not dark, and looking like any normal human being. One late evening in 1970, a patrolman named Jerry Myers had an encounter with a seemingly telepathic humanoid wearing what appeared to be a spacesuit. It seemed to be very curious as to why humans engage in warfare. This incident, like others to follow, is much more obscure and difficult to find information on. From what I gathered, Alliance is a town in Ohio where, in 1957, a couple saw a bright light in the sky before encountering strange beings in a cornfield by their home. The couple reported that there were at least 10 extraterrestrial creatures. They were approximately 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and no visible nose or mouth could be seen. After watching the couple's house for some time, the beings retreated back into the corn, leaving the family alone completely. The family did not report any direct contact or missing time. Dubbed the Polish Roswell incident, this story takes place in a large port in Gdynia. It was here where multiple people were working in a port when they saw a large orange light plummet from the sky before crashing into the water below. The ship itself was reportedly shaped like a cone and was extremely hot. The witnesses then fished the craft out of the water. It was then when the People's Republic of Poland arrived and confiscated the craft. They explained to the men that the craft was in fact a vessel containing chemical weapons or radioactive materials left by the Germans during the war. Mantis aliens are perhaps the most mysterious and unsettling of all extraterrestrial creatures. These beings appear within many abduction scenarios, with abductees reporting the ominous presence of these entities looming over their beds as they wake in the dead of night. While the mantis is not widely reported as the gray or Nordic alien, it holds an important role within many extraterrestrial contact scenarios. By far the most striking aspect of the mantis alien is its physical kinship with the praying mantis, the carnivorous and bipedal insect of its namesake. Many report these beings to be 6 to 7 feet tall with long, thin torsos, their necks, arms, and hands with additional joints. Their heads are insect-like and triangular with large, slanted eyes of deep brown to black. Most mantids are described as dark brown, but these colors such as green and black have also been encountered. Their bodies are composed of segmented exoskeleton, and some abductees have reported that the mantis seem to be coated with an oily substance. Mantises are often encountered wearing long robes in a variety of colors, perhaps signifying rank, while some are unclothed entirely. Also known as the Cisco Grove incident, this story involves Donald Shrum. He was out hunting one day with a bow and arrow. He eventually grew tired and fell asleep up in a tree. Upon waking up, he was greeted by a strange craft with bright lights. Confused, he flagged them down, believing it to be a helicopter. However, upon further investigation, he saw a cigar-shaped craft. Its occupants then began exiting the craft and approaching the base of the tree where Shrum was hiding. They eventually attempted to get him down by shaking the tree and using a mysterious gas. This gas would knock Shrum unconscious. When he awoke once more, the beings were still trying to get him out of the tree. Shrum retaliated in any way that he could, opting to shake the branches that they were trying to climb on, as well as throwing projectiles at them. The beings would eventually give up and retreat back to their craft. On April 24, 1964, at approximately 5:45 p.m., Socorro Police radio dispatcher Nep Lopez received a radio call from Sergeant Lonnie Zamora reporting a possible motor vehicle accident. Shortly after, Lopez received another radio call from Zamora asking Lopez to look out of the window to see if he could see an object. When Lopez asked Zamora to describe it, Zamora said that it looked like a balloon and requested New Mexico State Police Sergeant Chavez meet him in his location. When Chavez arrived, he asked Zamora what the trouble was. Zamora led him to examine some burning bush. When police officers arrived, they noted other patches of smoldering grass and brush. The Villa Santana alien sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place on August 14, 1947, near a creek in Italy. While painting, an artist noticed a 30-foot disc-shaped object that had alighted some distance from him. With his paintbrushes still in hand, the artist hailed the creatures. It is possible that this was interpreted as a hostile gesture, for one of the beings touched the center of its belt and projected a thin vapor which caused the artist to fall dazed onto his back. The creatures then approached the unconscious artist and stood examining his easel. Although weak, the artist contrived to roll over and saw the beings pick up the easel, which had been knocked down. He perceived that it was taller than both of the creatures. He also noticed that they were panting heavily. They then returned to the disc-shaped object and entered it, whereupon they rose from the ground, hovered, and, according to the account, disappeared. At the time of his alleged abduction, Antonio Vilas Boas was 23 years old. He was a Brazilian farmer who was working at night to avoid the hot temperatures during the day. On October 16, 1957, he was plowing fields when he saw what he described as a red star in the night sky. According to his story, this star approached his position, growing in size until it became recognizable as a roughly circular or egg-shaped aerial craft, with a red light on its front and rotating cupola on the top. The craft then began descending to land in the field, extending 3 legs as it did so. At that point, Boas decided to run from the scene. According to Boas, he first attempted to leave the scene on his tractor, but when its lights and engine died, after traveling only a short distance, he decided to continue on foot. However, he was seized by a 5-foot-tall humanoid who was wearing gray coveralls and a helmet. Its eyes were small and blue, and instead of speech, it made noises like barks or yelps. 3 similar beings then joined the first in subduing Boas, and they dragged him inside their craft. Once inside the craft, Boas said that he was stripped of his clothes and covered from head to toe with a strange gel. He was then led into a large semicircular room through a doorway that had strange red symbols written over it. In this room, the beings took samples of Boas's blood from his chin. After this, he was taken to a third room where he was left alone for around half an hour. During this time, some kind of gas was pumped into the room, which made Boas become violently ill. Shortly after this, Boas claimed that he was joined in the room by another humanoid. This one, however, was female, very attractive, and naked. She was around the same height as the other beings that he had encountered, with a small, pointed chin and large, blue, cat-like eyes. The hair on her head was long and white, but her underarm and pubic hair were bright red. Boas said that he was strongly attracted to the woman, and the two had sexual intercourse. During this act, Boas noted that the female did not kiss him, but instead nipped him on the chin. When it was all over, the female smiled at Boas, rubbing her belly and gesturing upwards. Boas took this as a sign that she was going to raise their child in space. The female seemed relieved that their task was over, and Boas himself felt angered by the situation because he felt as though he had been little more than a good stallion for the humanoids. Boas said that he was given back his clothing and taken on a tour of the ship by the humanoids. During this tour, he said that he had attempted to take a clock-like device as proof of his encounter, but was caught by the humanoids and prevented from doing so. He was then escorted off of the ship and watched as it took off, glowing brightly. When Boas returned home, he discovered that 4 hours had passed in total. Jan Wolski was out driving his horse-drawn cart early on the 10th of May 1978 when he says he was jumped by 2 short, green-faced humanoid entities at about 5 feet tall. The 2 beings jumped onto Wolski's cart and, according to Wolski, sat next to him and started to speak in a strange language. Originally, he had mistaken them for foreigners because of their slanted eyes and prominent cheekbones. Wolski continued to drive the cart with the 2 beings aboard, eventually coming to a clearing where he says a large object was hovering. Wolski then claims that he was taken aboard the ship with 2 additional entities he met near the flying object. He was then gestured to undress. There were about 8 to 10 benches situated around the craft, each the size for one person to sit in. There were some rooks in front of the door which was moving its legs and wings but seemed to be immobilized. Wolski claims that he was then examined with a tool that resembled 2 dishes or saucers. After this, he was ordered to redress, and it was then when he noticed that there were no lights or windows on the craft, only the daylight coming through the craft's door. The entities ate and then offered him something like icicles, but he refused. The craft's interior was described as black with a grayish tint, similar to that of the creature's outfits. Filiberto Cardenas was driving on Okeechobee Road with 3 family friends just north of the city when the car engine suddenly failed. He and another man got out of the car to check under the hood when a large luminous object emitting a humming sound descended over the vehicle. The witness vanished in plain sight of the others and was apparently taken up into an object by a beam of light. He was found dazed 2 hours later and 16 miles away from the original location by a police officer. Later, he recalled being taken up and blacking out. He found himself on board the object with 3 human-like beings, all dressed in tight-fitting white suits, who took him to an oceanfront-like location where they opened up a lock on a rock and entered through a tunnel beneath the sea. The beings were of average height, wearing dark, tight-fitting outfits that covered their heads, with winged snake-like emblems on their chests. They spoke to the witness in Spanish and mainly spoke about coming wars and disasters to come. He was led to a seat made out of a stone and was given a liquid to drink that tasted like honey. A huge door then opened in front of him and several persons began coming out. Cardenas began feeling a strong pressure in his chest, and at this point an individual approached him and told him that he was welcomed. The individual appeared totally human and spoke with a South American accent. Indeed, this man told Cardenas that he was from Earth, but he had lived with extraterrestrials for a while now. He was then taken through a door and corridor into what appeared to be a great city. He then entered a small room. There he was suddenly sucked into the wall, which then flipped over and became a bed. Paralyzed, he was unable to move and noticed several figures moving around him. As a light blinded him, something was inserted into his ear. From the wall emerged what appeared to be several arms ending in suction cups that covered his body almost completely. He felt no pain but could not move. After the examination was over, he was taken into another room. There he saw a tall seat, and on it was a tall man wearing a cape. He also saw numerous consoles and various monitors. He was then shown images of 3 pyramids joined by a thin ray of light. Cardenas apparently slept several times and was awakened and given several tablets to eat. In another room, he saw several human-like figures wearing gray coveralls. In another room, he saw a large gathering of people in what he thought was a party. Soon he was taken into another room where he saw a large rocket-style ship in which he was taken into, along with 3 other humans. After a short trip, he was made to exit and given something to eat. He last saw the object disappear into the distance. He was found disoriented by a police officer in an isolated section of Southwest 8th Street. A medical examination found 108 tiny pricks on Cardenas's body. Days after the encounter, he suffered from severe sweating, extreme thirst, extreme temperature changes, and a strong sulfur-like smell followed him. He also suffered from memory loss, decreased sexual appetite, and strange space-time altering episodes. This story originated from Kofu, Japan. Between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m., 2 7-year-old boys watched a luminous orange UFO approach Kofu, Japan while making a ticking sound. It landed on 3 ball-shaped legs in a nearby vineyard. The object was a domed disc, 5 meters in diameter and 6 feet high. The boys got very close to it and discovered the surface of the object was silver in color and had strange characters embossed on its surface. A ladder then extended out of the craft and down onto the ground, and a humanoid creature slightly over 4 feet tall disembarked. It wore a silver uniform and carried something that looked like a gun. His skin was dark brown and he had large pointed ears, but his large head had no facial features, no eyes, no nose or mouth. It merely had wrinkles on the face and 3 silvery 2-inch long fangs. Both boys could see 1 or more smaller humanoid figures in the cockpit. The being had emerged, reached out, and touched one of the boys, patting him twice on the shoulder and uttering the words like a tape recorder running backwards. The boy who had been touched sat down, paralyzed either by the touch or by fear, but his companion took him on his back and carried him from the vineyard. They then ran to one of the boys' homes and informed their parents, who could at first see the orange light pulsating from the vineyard. Then it disappeared as they watched. 2 concrete posts were then found pushed over from the landing site. In the late 1980s, a strange ship landed in a park in the Russian city of Voronezh on September 27, 1989. Some 300 miles from Moscow, citizens of Voronezh reported a deep red ball around 10 feet in diameter landing in a nearby park. A hatch opened and out stepped a 3-eyed creature that stood 9 feet tall and was dressed in silver overalls and bronze boots. It left the ship with a companion and a robot. After taking a triangle formation around the robot seemed to come to life. It was then when a boy began to scream in terror. With one look, the alien paralyzed the boy. The aliens then disappeared briefly and returned with what looked like a gun and shot the boy, who disappeared. He reappeared later, after the spacecraft had departed. Citizens of the town reported multiple sightings of the ship between September 23rd and September 27th, but when Soviet investigators came to the scene, their only abnormal finding was elevated levels of radioactive cesium-23. As for the children who witnessed the landing in the park, they were all separated. When asked to draw what they had seen that day, they all drew a banana-shaped object that left behind in the sky the sign of the letter X. The boy who was abducted could remember nothing about the craft. The local interior minister said that if the craft appeared again, they would dispatch the Red Army to investigate the event. If the aliens had returned in full force to invade the Soviet Union, they would have met the joint capability of the Soviets along with the United States, as President Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev agreed at the 1985 Lake Geneva summit to join forces against any extraterrestrial invader. The Garson Invaders sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place on July 2, 1954, at about 5 p.m. 23-year-old Canadian miner named Anio Lasarza spotted 3 of the aliens, reporting them as more than just hostile, but outright apocalyptic. The entities that emerged from the craft were described as colossal entities, 13 feet in height, with bluish-green skin and faces of a color he had never seen before. Their bodies seemed to glow, and they had a single eye in the center of what passed for their forehead. The beings had 6 evenly distributed sets of arms. The hands were equipped with crab-like claws, which opened and closed spasmodically. They were also equipped with a natural twin antenna on their head. The Space Penguins of Tascumbia sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place on the morning of February 14, 1967, in Tascumbia, Missouri. The witness was a 64-year-old farmer by the name of Claude Edwards. Claude saw what appeared to be a UFO sitting in one of the nearby fields. Edwards stated that before he saw this unusual object, the first thing that he noticed was all of his cattle in his east field were gazing in the same direction. He was astounded to see what he described as a massive grayish-green mushroom-like object which had perched atop a circular tube in the meadow adjacent to his barn. He also witnessed a group of small creatures scuttling beneath the craft. The Old Saybrook Blockhead sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place on December 16, 1957, near Old Saybrook, Connecticut. Retired teacher Mrs. Mary M. Starr reported that a bright light awoke her around 2 to 3 in the morning. Peering out her bedroom window, she thought at first that she was looking at a downed airplane until she realized that the object was hovering above her clothesline. Through the craft's large square windows, she witnessed 2 strange entities pass by one another with their right arms in the air. Their featureless appendages had no hands, their heads were transparent cubes with bright red cores, and their rubbery bodies flared out like skirts. She could not see if they had any legs, but guessed that they were at least 4 feet tall. An unnamed soldier awoke from his home in the barracks when one of the guard dogs began barking. Intrigued by what the dog was having such a reaction to, the soldier went to investigate. Upon doing so, he ran into a strange, colorful apparition. The face of this apparition was bright orange in color and horribly inclined forwards. If the sight was not scary enough, then the hideous scowl that it exposed might have taken the attention away from the large, unblinking eyes or the plume of fiery red hair. To complete this bizarre mismatch in color coordination, this creature had a bright blue suit without any collars. The apparition would eventually leave, causing the soldier to collapse in relief. The witness was 41-year-old well driller, husband and father of 4, Carl Higdon, who decided to take the day off to hunt elk in the northern region of Medicine Bow National Park, which is located just 40 miles south of his home in Rawlings. Upon encountering a group of elk, Higdon silently raised his heavy rifle, put his eye to the sight, and took an aim at the largest male. As soon as Higdon pulled the trigger of his magnum, he was astounded by the fact that there was no kickback from the rifle. What was even more perplexing was the fact that the detonation was absolutely silent. Higdon claimed that he was actually able to watch the bullet leave the barrel of the rifle and soar forward so slowly that it looked as if it was traveling through a wall of invisible jello. A bizarre alien being then slowly approached the terrified Higdon and asked him how he was doing. The hunter admitted that he was trying to stay calm, but weakly responded that he was doing pretty good. The ostensible extraterrestrial then inquired whether or not Higdon was hungry, but before he could even respond, the creature sent a small, clear cellophane package floating towards him, which contained 4 pills. The strange, jawless humanoid then introduced himself as Osso 1. That was when Higdon's gaze caught a strange box-like object catching the sun's rays in the clearing behind the strange creature. Intrigued by the awe at which Higdon was staring at its ship, the alien asked the hunter if he would like to come along with him. Higdon shrugged his shoulders in assent. It was at this point that time appeared to leap forward, as Higdon's next recollection was of the being inside the cube-like craft. Higdon later recalled being given a tour of Osso 1's home planet. The Paciencia abductor sighting is an extraterrestrial sighting and abduction case that took place on September 15, 1977, in the town of Paciencia, Brazil. The witness was a 33-year-old bus driver named Antonio Larrubia. Antonio encountered a huge object, which he estimated to be about 235 feet across, sitting in a field near his home. He decided to retreat, but was unable to do so, for the moment that he started to run, an intense bright light lit up the area and he was unable to move. At that moment, Antonio saw 3 robots positioned near him, and he was captured and taken into the disc-shaped craft. The Felixstowe fire demon sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place in Felixstowe, England on the evening of September 20th, 1965. The group consisted of driver 25-year-old Jeffrey Maskey and his passengers Mavis Fordyce and Michael Johnson. In what must have been an effort to preserve gas, Maskey pulled over on the curb next to a hedgerow on an isolated tree-lined Walton Avenue. The youngsters were then engaged in lively conversation when Johnson abruptly opened the door and walked out into the murky night. Fordyce and Maskey exchanged perplexed glances as their cohort vanished into the blackness, but simply assumed that he had gone to use the bathroom in the woods. Johnson would later tell his friends and doctors that he was forced to walk into the dark forest, although he was unable to recall what exactly for. It was then when he encountered what he described as a humanoid being with large sloping eyes that were glowing in the darkness. He also claimed that the odd creature was engulfed by orange flames. It was at that point when he blacked out completely. A man named Zanfredo was examining a Casa Nostra when he encountered a red oval object with a diameter of approximately 33 feet. At this point, he called his supervisor, who recalled him screaming. When turning around, Zanfredo reported running into beings that were about 9.8 feet tall, with molded skin as though they were fat or wearing a rumpled suit. The creatures had yellow triangular eyes and clawed feet. When the supervisor asked if he was being attacked by men, Zanfredo said to have responded, "No, they are not men," at which point communication was lost. Zanfredo was later found unconscious and in a state of shock by his colleagues. Later, when under hypnosis, Zanfredo would claim that the beings had abducted him and taken him into a bright room in their craft. He also added to the description of the aliens by saying, "They are green, with triangular yellow eyes, with big thorns. They have green flesh and their skin is full of wrinkles as if they are old. Their mouths look as though they're made of iron. They have red veins on their heads, pointed ears, and arms with fingernails, with round things. They come from the third galaxy." The Chek-Sing-Shian flying jellyfish is an atmospheric jellyfish, a type of UFO, sighted by a Chinese Air Force pilot and 140 ground officials on Monday, October 19, 1998, in Chek-Sing-Shian, China. The sighting prompted speculations on what the creature really was. Atmospheric jellyfish are flying jellyfish that have been sighted floating in the atmosphere. It is mostly known because of its appearance in The Secret Saturdays. According to British scientist Dr. Maggie Alderin-Pocock, the aliens likely exist. The Potosi sheep slayer sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place in early 1968 near Potosi, Bolivia. The witness, a llama and sheep herder named Valentina Flores, was bringing her livestock in for the night when she noticed a net covering one of the pens. Under the net, someone was attacking and disemboweling the sheep with an unusual hooked instrument. Flores, thinking that the being was a short robber, yelled and threw rocks at it. The creature went into a strange radio-like device which absorbed the net and then threw its own hooked instruments at Flores, which only caused her slight wounds but instantly returned to the creature like a boomerang. The being then grabbed the radio-like device and a bag that it had evidently been putting the sheep organs in and put both items in the rucksack on its back, which itself extended a pair of legs to the ground, and the strange entity flew off straight into the air. The Prospect Monolith sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place on January 27, 1977, near Prospect, Kentucky. Driving home one night at 1 in the morning, 19-year-old Lee Parrish spotted a rectangular object hovering in the sky. Suddenly, his radio failed and he was unable to control his vehicle. He arrived home with sore and bloodshot eyes and was unable to account for more than half an hour of time. On October 9, 1989, TASS reported that a correspondent had spoken to 10 or 12 youths who had claimed to have seen a flying saucer. The original article quoted Dr. Silanov of Voronezh Geophysical Laboratory as confirming the location of the landing using biolocation. According to Paul Kurtz, the method of biolocation they used was a form of ESP dowsing. The report was the most publicized of a series of UFO claims made by the official government media and was promoted as part of the government's new openness to the topic. It was noted that, unlike in America, the reported beings were completely apolitical and did not even speak during their visit. In the immediate aftermath of the alleged incident, hundreds of UFO reports began appearing, with a reporter from the Red Star claiming to have an exclusive interview with one of the alien beings. In addition to the TASS, Sovietskaya Kultura, a Communist Party paper, publicized the children's claims, with the communist newspaper defending its decision, saying its coverage was motivated by the golden rule of journalism: the reader must know everything. The newspaper was repeatedly asked whether the report was in jest and repeatedly assured that it was not. Following the initial publicity, a private company was formed to sell tours of the Voronezh, billed as the Land of Aliens, for $95 a person. The description of the incident was very similar to the stories that appeared in American magazine Saga, but TASS reports stated that the witnesses probably haven't read it. Outside of the print media, the U.S. show A Current Affair also sent a crew to report on the alleged event. The following case comes from someone who has chosen to remain anonymous to this day. Because of this, the information regarding the case is very difficult to find. In Vilvoorde, Belgium in 1973, this anonymous source, who refers to himself as Mr. V, was using the restroom in the middle of the night when he encountered a humanoid-like figure, emitting a green glow. Mr. V then grabbed the attention of the creature by turning on a nearby light switch. At this point, Mr. V could see that the creature had no distinguishing facial features, no eyes, no mouth, and no nose. The creature signaled to Mr. V before returning and walking up a large wall before disappearing behind it completely. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video and continuing to support the channel. If you would like more videos like this, please press the subscribe button and share the video with your friends. Please stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next video.